You think an old tattoo is enough to get you into an admiral ceremony? Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer's voice cut across the security checkpoint with the clean edge of a slammed steel door. His hand was locked around Walter Hayes's wrist beneath the white glare of the inspection lights, holding the old man's arm above the scanner as though he had caught him passing counterfeit bills instead of entering a naval base. The morning wind rolled in from the harbor, sharp with salt and diesel, snapping the flags above the gate and pressing Walter's faded jacket against his narrow frame. At 82, he looked almost too slight to cast a shadow. His hair was silver, his face weathered by decades of sun, and his pale blue eyes held the stillness of deep water. He did not pull away. He simply looked down at Mercer's fingers, then at the faded mark exposed on his left forearm. The tattoo was old enough that its black lines had softened to gray. A narrow lighthouse rose above a broken curve of waves, crossed by a single dark line that had blurred with age. To anyone else, it might have looked like cheap ink from a dockside shop. Mercer gave a short laugh and turned Walter's arm so the other military police officers could see it. "What is that supposed to be, sir? Some secret club for retired fishermen?" A few young MPs glanced over from the next lane. One smirked. Another shook his head. Walter's expression did not change. Behind the checkpoint, black government vehicles moved through the inner gate toward the administration building, their tires humming over wet pavement. Somewhere beyond the concrete barriers, a brass ensemble was rehearsing the opening notes for the ceremony honoring Admiral Thomas Caldwell. Walter listened to the distant music for half a second, then returned his gaze to Mercer. "Let go of my arm," he said. His voice was low, rough, and calm. It carried no threat, yet the laughter around the checkpoint thinned. Mercer tightened his grip instead. "Not until you explain why you're carrying an invitation that won't scan, showing up with no clearance, and wearing a fake unit mark on a restricted installation." Walter's right hand remained at his side, holding a small wooden box polished smooth by years of handling. The box was no larger than a hardcover book. Its brass latch had turned green around the edges. Mercer noticed it and nodded toward the inspection table. "Put that down and open it." Walter did not move. The flags cracked overhead. A gull cried somewhere above the seawall. Corporal Ethan Cole, standing behind the terminal, watched the old man more carefully than the others did. There was something wrong with the scene, though he could not yet name it. Walter finally lifted his eyes to Mercer's face. "This mark won't get me through the gate," he said. Mercer's smile returned. "At least we agree on something." Walter looked past him toward the distant building where the Admiral's ceremony was about to begin. "No," he said. "But the man wearing the other half will." Mercer's smile faded, but only for a moment. He released Walter's wrist and pointed toward the steel inspection table beneath the checkpoint canopy. "The other half," he repeated. "That is a convenient story. Put the box down." Walter studied him with the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime waiting for younger men to finish speaking. Then he placed the wooden box on the table. The brass latch made a soft click against the cold metal. Mercer reached for it, but Walter's weathered hand settled over the lid first. "Careful," he said. "Those names have already been handled roughly enough." The words carried no accusation, yet Corporal Ethan Cole felt them land harder than Mercer's commands. Mercer drew himself upright. "You are at a restricted entrance to Naval Station Harbor Point. You have no valid electronic pass, no listed sponsor, and no appointment in the visitor system. I am giving you a lawful instruction to open the container." Walter removed his hand. The latch lifted with a dry metallic snap. Inside lay 4 identification tags, their edges darkened and scarred by age. They rested on a folded piece of navy blue cloth beside a cream-colored invitation. The paper had no official seal, no printed signature, and no digital access code. Across the front, written in dark blue ink, were 5 words. "Bring the names home, Walt." The wind shifted beneath the canopy, carrying the muted notes of the brass ensemble from nearly half a mile away. Walter's eyes remained on the tags. Mercer picked up the invitation between two gloved fingers and examined both sides. "This is not a credential." "It was not meant to be," Walter answered. "Then what is it?" "A promise." Mercer looked toward the other officers as if inviting them to share the absurdity. "A promise from whom?" Walter lifted his gaze toward the administration building. "Thomas Caldwell." This time no one laughed immediately. Admiral Thomas Caldwell's name was printed on every ceremony notice distributed across the base that week. He was scheduled to retire before sunset, closing a career that had shaped nearly 4 decades of naval operations. Mercer entered Walter's name into the terminal again. Walter Hayes. Age 82. Virginia driver's license. No military service record displayed. No listed security clearance. No official association with the ceremony. Then Mercer searched the phrase printed inside the invitation. Night lantern. The system returned nothing. He tried it without a space. Nothing. He added naval operation. Still nothing. "There is no night lantern," Mercer said. Walter looked at the screen but showed no surprise. "Not where you are searching." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Every authorized operation has a record." "Every authorized operation has several records," Walter said. "The public one. The classified one. And the one carried by the men who came home." Ethan glanced at the faded tattoo again. "The lighthouse. The broken wave. The dark line crossing both." Something about it pulled at an old memory, a photograph from his grandfather's attic, perhaps, or a story heard too young to understand. Mercer lifted one of the tags from the box. "These can be purchased in any surplus shop." Walter's face remained still, but the silence around him changed. "Not those," he said. Mercer turned the tag beneath the inspection light. On the back, almost hidden beneath decades of tarnish, a hand-cut inscription caught the white glare. Night Lantern 5. Keep the light. Ethan stopped breathing for a second. He had heard those exact words before. The words on the tag pulled Ethan backward through memory, into the dim attic of his childhood home where dust floated through narrow beams of summer light. His grandfather had kept an old photograph inside a cedar box beneath a folded Navy uniform. 5 young men stood on the deck of a vessel with no visible number, their faces turned toward the camera, their sleeves rolled above their elbows. Ethan remembered the lighthouse marks on their arms. He remembered asking what they meant. His grandfather had closed the box and answered with the same quiet phrase now engraved into the metal in Mercer's hand. Keep the light. Ethan stepped closer to the inspection table. "Staff Sergeant, may I see that?" Mercer turned the identification tag away from him. "Return to your station, Corporal." "My grandfather used those words." "Your grandfather is not part of this security review." Mercer raised the tag so the officers near the adjoining lane could see it. This is exactly how false military claims work. An old artifact, a dramatic story, a symbol nobody can verify, and just enough mystery to make people afraid to question it. Walter watched the tag sway from Mercer's fingers. His face remained composed, but his right hand slowly closed at his side. "Put it back," he said. Mercer ignored him. "You arrive without clearance on the morning of a major ceremony. You carry 4 damaged identification tags and claim an admiral personally invited you. Your service history does not exist, and neither does your operation." He glanced at the faded tattoo. "Now you expect us to believe that mark belongs to some forgotten unit." Walter's pale eyes settled on him. "I did not ask you to believe anything. You asked us to call Admiral Caldwell. That is not the same thing." The difference seemed to irritate Mercer more than an argument would have. He placed the tag on the table, but not inside the box. Then he reached across and took Walter's left forearm again, turning the tattoo toward the gathering officers. "Look closely," Mercer said. "No unit number. No official crest. No recognized insignia. It could mean anything." One officer gave an uncertain laugh. Another looked away. The humiliation no longer felt casual. It had become a performance, and Walter had been made its silent center. Ethan saw the old man's gaze drop to the lighthouse. For the first time, something moved behind his calm expression. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The inspection lights reflected against the faded ink, and the white glare became, in Walter's mind, a distant beam moving across black water. The wind under the canopy deepened into the low moan of a storm passing over steel. The clean smell of rain on pavement gave way to salt, fuel, and overheated machinery. For one suspended moment, the naval gate disappeared. Walter was young again, standing beneath a night sky with no stars, listening to Thomas Caldwell call 4 names into a radio that answered only with static. Mercer tapped the tattoo with one gloved finger. The memory tightened around Walter's chest. His eyes lifted. "Do not touch that mark again." His voice was barely louder than the wind, yet every officer at the checkpoint heard it. Mercer's expression hardened. "Or what?" Walter gently pulled his arm free. "Or you will keep treating a grave like a joke." Silence settled beneath the canopy. Even Mercer had no immediate reply. Ethan looked from the tattoo to the inscription on the tag. Then he turned toward his terminal, lowered his hands to the keyboard, and entered the letters his grandfather had once written inside the cedar box. Night Lantern 5. The screen went black. A red seal appeared at its center. Then the entire security station locked with a sharp mechanical click. The mechanical lock struck all at once, sealing the doors, freezing the vehicle barriers, and turning every access light from green to red. A warning tone pulsed through the checkpoint, low and steady. Mercer spun toward Ethan. "What did you enter?" Ethan stared at the terminal. The red seal remained at the center of the black screen, surrounded by a line of white text. Restricted historical designation recognized. Flag officer authorization required. "I entered the code from the tag," Ethan said. "You had no authority to do that." Mercer reached for the keyboard, but the terminal rejected his identification card with a sharp tone. The other stations had locked as well. Beyond the barriers, 2 staff cars rolled to a stop, their drivers waiting beneath the snapping flags. Mercer keyed his radio. "Security control, this is Gate 3. We have a system lockout." Static answered first. Then a controller spoke with sudden caution. "Gate 3, remain in position. Do not remove the visitor. Do not alter any materials in his possession." Mercer looked at Walter. "What did you do?" Walter's eyes remained on the faded mark along his forearm. "Nothing." The white inspection light shimmered against the old ink, and the checkpoint slipped away from him again. He stood inside a narrow machinery compartment nearly 50 years earlier, both hands braced against a vibrating control panel. Rain hammered the vessel above them. The deck rolled beneath his boots as black water struck the hull in heavy waves. There were 5 men in the compartment then. Walter Hayes, Thomas Caldwell, Samuel Price, Owen Barrett, and Joseph Lane. No official uniforms. No ship number. No flag painted on the steel. Their orders had carried a name that would never appear in newspapers. Night Lantern. A damaged transmitter sat open beside Caldwell, its wiring exposed beneath a swinging lamp. "The main generator is failing," Caldwell said. He was young then, barely 30, but already carried command in his voice. Walter listened to the uneven rhythm below the floor plates. "We have 12 minutes before it quits. The rescue signal needs 20. Walter opened the leather tool roll at his feet. "Then we make 12 behave like 20. The others smiled, not because the situation was funny, but because Walter's certainty gave them somewhere to place their fear. He rerouted power by hand, moving between the panel and the auxiliary line while Caldwell transmitted their position into the storm. For nearly an hour, the only light beyond the vessel came from a lighthouse several miles to the west. Its beam crossed the rain at measured intervals, appearing, vanishing, then returning. A promise made of light. When the generator finally went silent, the rescue aircraft had their coordinates. 5 men had begun the mission, but only 2 would stand together when the sea calmed. Before dawn, using a medical needle and ink drained from a radio marker, the survivors placed the lighthouse on their arms. The broken wave belonged to those the water had taken. The dark line marked the boundary between the names the Navy could honor and the names it could never admit were there. The memory released Walter slowly. He was back beneath the checkpoint canopy, his hand resting near the wooden box. Mercer was still watching him, but the confidence in the younger man's face had begun to crack. Ethan read the new message appearing on the terminal. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "Security Control has transferred authority over this gate." "To whom?" Before Ethan could answer, every radio at the station activated on the same channel. A calm voice spoke through the static. "This is the office of Admiral Thomas Caldwell. No one touches Walter Hayes or anything he brought with him." The voice from the Admiral's office ended, leaving only the warning tone and the harbor wind beneath the canopy. Mercer slowly lowered his radio. The gloved hand that had held Walter's identification tag now hovered above the table, uncertain where to place it. Ethan looked at the terminal as new lines of text appeared beneath the red seal. Historical access protocol active. Preserve all personal effects. Await direct command. For the first time that morning, Mercer seemed smaller than his uniform. "Sir," he said to Walter, forcing control into his voice, "I was following procedure." Walter did not look at him. He reached for the tag Mercer had left outside the wooden box and placed it gently beside the others. The 4 pieces of metal touched with a faint, dry sound. "Procedure keeps gates secure," Walter said. "Pride keeps good men standing on the wrong side of them." Ethan felt the words settle over the checkpoint. He turned back to the inscription and enlarged the scanned image on his screen. Night Lantern 5. Keep the light. Beneath the visible letters, the system had detected a second pattern so faint that ordinary inspection would have missed it. 4 short marks surrounded the edge of the tag, each positioned like points on a compass. Ethan had seen the same arrangement before. His grandfather's cedar box had carried 4 tiny cuts around its brass lock. As a child, Ethan had assumed they were scratches. Now he understood they had been deliberate. "Mr. Hayes," Ethan said carefully, "did you know a chief petty officer named Samuel Cole?" Walter's hand stopped above the open box. The wind lifted one corner of the folded blue cloth. Slowly, he turned toward Ethan. "Sam Cole was your grandfather?" Ethan nodded. "He died when I was 11. He never spoke about his service, but he kept a photograph of 5 men on an unmarked vessel. One of them looked like you." Walter studied Ethan's face as though searching for something time had carried forward. Then his expression softened by the smallest degree. "You have his eyes." Ethan swallowed. Was he part of Night Lantern? Walter looked down at the 4 tags. He was the reason the rescue signal lasted as long as it did. The answer came without decoration, yet it changed the air around them. Ethan stepped closer to the box. One of the tags bore the name Samuel Price, not Samuel Cole. His confusion must have shown. Walter touched the edge of that tag. Price was the name listed for the mission. Cole was the name he brought home. Ethan stared at the metal. His grandfather had lived under silence so complete that even his family had known only half of him. Mercer shifted beside the inspection table. "There are 4 tags," he said. "But you said 5 men." Walter's eyes moved from one name to the next. 5 men left the harbor. 3 were lost before sunrise. One returned under a different name. And one was declared dead so the operation could remain buried. Ethan looked at him. You. Walter gave no answer. He did not need to. The terminal chimed, and a sealed personnel record opened for less than 1 second before the screen automatically dimmed. Ethan caught only a photograph of a much younger Walter and a single line stamped across the file. Official status, deceased. Restricted by order of Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell. Mercer saw it too. His face lost the last of its color. From inside the base came the deep ceremonial note of a ship's bell. Once. Twice. Then it stopped before the third strike. Every officer at Gate 3 turned toward the administration road. In the distance, a black command vehicle had broken away from the procession and was moving toward them. The black command vehicle crossed the final 200 yards with its lights off and its speed steady, not hurried, yet carrying the kind of purpose that made everyone at Gate 3 stand straighter. It stopped beyond the locked barrier. The rear door opened before the driver could step around. Captain Laura Mitchell emerged first, Admiral Caldwell's senior aide, her dark blue uniform precise despite the wind. 2 officers followed her, both carrying sealed folders against their chests. Mercer moved forward automatically. "Ma'am, the station entered a restricted lockout after Corporal Cole submitted an unauthorized historical code." Mitchell did not look at him. Her attention went directly to Walter, then to the wooden box on the inspection table. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and the respect in her voice was unmistakable. Walter gave a small nod. "Captain." Ethan watched Mercer absorb the fact that they knew each other's names. Mitchell approached the terminal and inserted a silver command card. The screen brightened, but instead of reopening the gate, it displayed a chain of authorization notices moving rapidly upward. Harbor Security Command. Naval Records Division. Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. Each line changed from pending to confirmed. Mercer stared at the sequence. "This is going beyond base command." Mitchell finally turned toward him. "It went beyond base command 50 years ago." She opened the first sealed folder and removed a single page. At the top was the operation name. Night Lantern. Below it appeared 5 identities, 4 obscured by black classification bars. Walter Hayes was the only name visible. Beside it, in red, was the word deceased. "That status was entered to protect surviving personnel and their families," Mitchell said. "It was never corrected because the operation remained compartmented." Walter looked toward the administration building, where the ceremony. Music had gone silent. Thomas should have left it buried. Mitchell's expression softened. "The Admiral disagrees." Inside the main hall, Admiral Thomas Caldwell stood behind a curtain beside a podium carrying the presidential seal. Hundreds of guests waited beyond it, including retired officers, sailors, families, and members of Congress. On the stage were 5 chairs. 4 held folded flags and framed photographs. The 5th was empty. Caldwell's speech rested untouched on the table. His chief of staff leaned close. "Sir, the audience is waiting." Caldwell held the radio message in one hand and Walter's invitation list in the other. "They have waited 50 years, he said. They can wait 5 more minutes. He looked at the empty chair. For decades, he had believed Walter would never come. Each year, the invitation had been returned unopened or left unanswered. This morning, someone had finally reported that Walter Hayes was standing at Gate 3 with the names. Caldwell removed his ceremonial jacket from the chair beside him and rolled the sleeve of his white uniform shirt halfway up his right forearm. The faded lighthouse mark appeared beneath the bright room lights. His chief of staff had seen it only once before. "Bring the car around," Caldwell said. "Sir, Captain Mitchell is already at the gate. Then she can keep it open until I arrive." Back at the checkpoint, Mitchell received the order through her earpiece. She straightened and faced the military police. "No one processes Mr. Hayes. No one questions him further. Admiral Caldwell is coming personally. Mercer glanced at the locked barrier and then at Walter. Personally? Mitchell's eyes hardened. Yes, Staff Sergeant. The retirement ceremony has been suspended. A gust struck the canopy, rattling the metal frame overhead. Walter closed the wooden box and secured the green-edged latch. Ethan stepped nearer. Why would the Admiral stop everything? Walter rested one hand on the lid. Because those 4 names were the reason he lived long enough to become one. The words had barely left Walter's mouth when the distant command vehicle appeared at the end of the administration road. This one carried no flashing lights, no escort motorcycles, and no ceremonial flags. It moved through the halted traffic with quiet authority, its dark body reflecting the gray harbor sky. Captain Mitchell stepped away from the terminal and faced the approaching car. Every officer at Gate 3 followed her movement. Mercer adjusted his uniform, then looked down at the identification tag still lying near the edge of the table. He picked it up with sudden care and placed it inside the wooden box. Walter noticed, but said nothing. The vehicle stopped on the opposite side of the locked barrier. Admiral Thomas Caldwell stepped out alone. He wore white dress trousers, polished black shoes, and a white uniform shirt without his jacket. 4 stars shone on each shoulder. The wind caught his silver hair as he crossed the pavement, but his eyes never left Walter. Mercer called the checkpoint to attention. Boots struck concrete in a single sharp rhythm. Caldwell passed the line without returning the salute. He reached the red barrier and stopped. For several seconds, the 2 old men simply looked at each other through the steel arm that separated them. 50 years moved silently between their faces. Caldwell had changed from the young officer Walter remembered. His shoulders were heavier. The lines around his eyes were deeper. Yet beneath the rank, ceremony, and long public career, Walter could still see the man seated beside a failing transmitter, speaking into a storm and refusing to let the signal die. "You came," Caldwell said. His voice was quieter than anyone expected. Walter rested one hand on the wooden box. "You asked me to bring them home." Caldwell looked down at it, and the practiced composure of an admiral nearly broke. "I asked you every year. This was the first year you included their names." The barrier remained locked between them. Caldwell turned toward Mitchell. "Open the gate. The historical protocol is still holding the system, sir." Mercer stepped forward. "Admiral, I can release it manually." Caldwell looked at him for the first time. The young staff sergeant's confidence had vanished, replaced by the rigid uncertainty of a man beginning to understand the size of his mistake. "Then do it," Caldwell said. Mercer moved to the emergency housing and lifted the protective cover. His hand paused over the release lever. He looked back at Walter. "Sir, before I open this gate, I need to acknowledge that I handled this situation poorly." Walter met his eyes. "Open it first." Mercer pulled the lever. The red barrier rose with a hydraulic groan. At the same moment, the warning lights went dark and the security terminals returned to green. Caldwell walked forward, but Mercer moved between him and Walter before anyone could react. "There is one more issue," Mercer said. Captain Mitchell's expression sharpened. "Staff Sergeant." Mercer reached for a sealed evidence pouch on his belt. Inside was a small cloth pad marked with a faint gray stain. "I attempted to determine whether the tattoo was temporary," he admitted. "I used an alcohol wipe on Mr. Hayes's arm before your order reached us." The checkpoint became completely still. Caldwell looked at Walter's reddened skin, then at the faded lighthouse beneath it. He did not raise his voice. "You tried to erase it?" Mercer swallowed. "Yes, sir." Caldwell slowly unfastened the cuff of his right sleeve. "Then you should understand what you were touching." He rolled the fabric upward, revealing the same weathered lighthouse, the same broken wave, and a dark line running in the opposite direction. Walter lifted his left arm. Side by side, the two marks completed a circle around the lighthouse. The men at Gate 3 stared in silence. Caldwell faced Mercer. This was never a decoration. It was the last record of 5 sailors whose mission could not be written down. Then he looked back at Walter. And this man carried their names when the Navy could not. No one at Gate 3 moved. The two faded marks rested side by side beneath the cold morning light, their broken lines joining across the narrow space between Walter and Caldwell until the lighthouse stood inside a complete circle of waves. Time had softened the ink on both arms, but it had not changed the shape. Ethan stared at the symbol and finally understood why his grandfather had hidden the same image in an attic box. It was not a crest designed for recognition. It was a promise designed for memory. Admiral Caldwell lowered his arm but did not roll down his sleeve. Night Lantern was never entered into the public record, he said. The vessel carried no number, and the men aboard it carried temporary names. Their work prevented a classified surveillance system from falling into foreign hands, but the cost of acknowledging the mission would have exposed families, sources, and operations that continued for decades. His eyes moved toward the wooden box. So the Navy honored them with silence. Walter's expression hardened. Silence is not honor when the families never learn why their sons did not return. Caldwell accepted the words without defense. They had the weight of an argument carried for half a century. Mercer stood at attention, his face pale beneath the checkpoint lights. "Admiral, I did not know." Caldwell turned toward him. "That is true." The answer was calm, which made it heavier. "You did not know who he was. You did not know what the symbol meant. You did not know why the record was sealed." Mercer swallowed. "Yes, sir. But you knew he was an elderly man standing alone. You knew he asked you to verify his invitation. You knew the objects in that box mattered to him." Caldwell looked toward the alcohol pad inside the evidence pouch. "Ignorance explains why you failed to recognize the mark. It does not explain why you mocked it." The harbor wind crossed the open gate, stirring the folded blue cloth beneath the identification tags. Mercer looked at Walter. "Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology." Walter closed the lid of the box. "You owe the next man patience." Mercer's eyes lowered. "Yes, sir." Caldwell stepped closer to Walter. "The hall is waiting. They are waiting for your retirement ceremony." "Not anymore." Caldwell reached for the wooden box, but Walter held it firmly. For a moment, the two men stood as they once had aboard the unnamed vessel, each refusing to let the other carry the burden alone. Then Caldwell placed his hand beneath the box rather than taking it. Together, they lifted it from the table. Captain Mitchell moved toward the command vehicle, but Caldwell shook his head. "We walk." The administration building stood nearly half a mile inside the base. Caldwell began toward it beside Walter, matching the older man's measured pace. Ethan stepped out from behind the terminal. "Mr. Hayes." Walter turned. Ethan's voice tightened around the question. "Was my grandfather one of the men you came to honor?" Walter looked at the young corporal for a long moment. Then he opened the box and removed the tag marked Samuel Price. He placed it in Ethan's palm. "Your grandfather kept the signal alive after the generator failed," Walter said. "He used his own name only once that night. He asked me to remember it." Ethan closed his fingers around the metal. His eyes shone, but he stood straight. Walter gave him a small nod and continued through the gate. Mercer watched the two old men walk away with the box held between them. Then, without being ordered, he raised his hand in salute. Ethan followed. Captain Mitchell followed next. One by one, every military police officer at Gate 3 came to attention. Walter did not turn around, but Caldwell did. The Admiral returned their salute with his faded lighthouse still visible beneath his rolled sleeve. The walk to the administration building took nearly 10 minutes, though no one along the route seemed willing to measure it. Sailors paused beside parked vehicles. Officers stepped out from shaded walkways. Civilian staff members lowered their voices as Admiral Caldwell and Walter Hayes passed with the wooden box held between them. No announcement had been made, yet the silence moved ahead of them like a signal. By the time they reached the ceremonial hall, the brass ensemble had set down its instruments, and every guest was standing. 5 chairs waited beneath the flags on the stage. 4 held framed photographs and folded Navy banners. The 5th remained empty. Caldwell stopped at the entrance and looked at Walter. "That chair was always yours." Walter studied it, then shook his head. "Not while theirs are still empty." Together they crossed the hall. The sound of their shoes against the polished floor was the only sound in the room. Mercer, Ethan, Captain Mitchell, and the security officers entered behind them, but remained near the rear wall. Walter reached the stage and placed the wooden box on the center table. He opened it slowly. One by one, he removed the 4 identification tags. Samuel Cole, Owen Barrett, Joseph Lane, David Price. He placed each tag before an empty chair. The guests watched without applause. This was not a moment that needed noise. Caldwell stepped to the podium, but he did not open the prepared retirement speech. "For 50 years," he said, "the United States Navy carried an incomplete history." His voice filled the hall, steady but stripped of ceremony. 4 men were lost during an operation whose existence could not be acknowledged. A 5th man survived, but allowed the record to declare him dead so that others could live without becoming targets of secrets they never chose. He turned toward Walter. "That man is Walter Hayes." A murmur moved through the room, then disappeared. Walter stood beside the 4 chairs, his faded lighthouse visible beneath his rolled sleeve. Caldwell continued. "He repaired the failing power system that carried our final signal. He kept injured men calm. He gave up his own place during evacuation until every other survivor was accounted for. Then he spent half a century protecting the names in that box." Walter looked down at the tags. "I did not protect names," he said quietly. "I protected promises." Caldwell left the podium and stood beside him. He raised his right arm, revealing the matching mark. Walter lifted his left. Once again, the broken waves formed a complete circle around the lighthouse. This time, hundreds of people saw it. No one laughed. No one questioned whether it was real. Admiral Caldwell faced the audience. This mark was never a badge of rank. It was a reminder that those who came home would carry those who did not. At the rear of the hall, Mercer removed his hat. Ethan still held his grandfather's tag against his palm. Caldwell ordered no salute, but one began anyway. Ethan raised his hand first. Mercer followed. Then Captain Mitchell. Across the hall, sailors, officers, veterans, and admirals came to attention until every uniformed person stood in silent tribute. Walter looked at the 4 chairs. His eyes carried the grief of a young man and the patience of an old one. Then he returned the salute, not for himself, but for the names before him. Outside, the harbor wind struck the flags and carried the first clear note of the ship's bell across the base. This time, it rang 5 times. Some marks fade from the skin. The promises behind them never do.